What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Friday edition of On Cue. Rich Quinones is here. As always, we appreciate the support on the YouTube channel, Rich Q on Q. Get social with us on XIG at Rich Q on Q. A lot of NFL stuff, especially in our backyard, to get into, most notably the debacle, the nonsense that's occurring between players, if you want to say infighting within the Philadelphia Eagles organization. Help us break it down a little more on this Friday. Our good friend Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football, 1029 The Game. Follow him on X at Lloyd Vance. And all right, my friend. So we figured maybe we were going to get through a quiet week or two getting into the offseason, but now there's these reports from, a very reliable source in Derek Gunn, who covered the Eagles, who's been covering the Eagles for about 30-something odd years. He tweeted out the other day, according to sources, Jalen Hurts' big contract pulled in numerous directions on and off the field, put him under a lot of pressure he didn't handle well. Security guard Big Dom suspended, quote, control Sirianni's emotions on sidelines. In his absence, Nick gets in numerous arguments with players and coaches during games. And then we'll get into what Craig Carton of FS1, former WFAN fan host, said in a moment. But again, this goes back to, why would you bring this guy back? He just seems like an immature child that's a glorified cheerleader. And the fact that you need another grown man to hold your emotions in check tells me everything I need to know about you. And I'm hearing, people are sitting there saying, well, it doesn't mean he's not a good head coach. And, everyone's picking on Nick Sirianni. Hey, man, he brought it on himself. I think if you gloss over this, you're absolutely foolish. I think there's smoke. There's certainly fire. So when you hear what D. Gunn tweeted out, knowing he's got the pulse on that team, what's your first thought?
Yeah, Q, it's stuff leaking from the inside. And it's a lot of what we talked about coming down the stretch at the end of the season, where what is wrong with this team? And it was a fractured locker room. You could see that as the results on the field played out, losing, 6 to 7 last games and getting embarrassed down in Tampa Bay. And it just shows you a guy is well connected. I know Derek Gunn, in terms of the locker room. He talks to a lot of players on the record, off the record, and there's definitely, where there's smoke, there's fire, as you said, Q, and it's a bad situation. And it does beg to say, once again, how did Nick Sirianni survive this thing? If he was an X and O's guru, if he was an ultimate leader of men, you know what I mean? This is not the second coming of Vince Lombardi here. So, it's just another olive branch being extended to him by ownership. And you have to once again say, okay, it's because Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman are able to, I'll say, work very well with Nick Sirianni. Basically, they're controlling this narrative of this team right now.
Yeah, but again, you hear that you need a security guard to basically keep your emotions in check, and you're arguing with players and coaching staff. It just seems like an immature guy, right? That's just not all there. And you look at the hire, think about what he said when he was hired about the plants and the water and the dirt and giving it time. And then they make the playoffs and they get to the Super Bowl. They almost win the Super Bowl. And then he's still saying, all the wrong things. He's not really controlling the narrative. He's trying to push across his own narrative when he's not thinking about the team first and foremost. He kind of dismisses the A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts feud. He dismisses the undivided, the locker room divided. He dismisses, telling fans to get out in Kansas City. Then they drop 6 of 7. Then they get waxed on the road against Tampa Bay in a complete no-show. Like, for the life of me, he should not have returned. He should not have returned. They should have cut ties with him then and there after that Tampa Bay loss. So I hear that. What makes me think he's going to change and calm down? I mean, he's not going to.
He has arrogance about himself. It's his way or the highway, and he feels like he got his big anointment last year, the year before, when they made the Super Bowl, and he is in that ilk of coaches where he can just say and do whatever he wants, and just not the case. Q, the results bared it out. This team, he lost the locker, and they quit on him. And he had no answer. And then he stood at the podium and they asked him, they said, what do you think is wrong with the team? He's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then they said, are you worried about your job? No. It's these nasty one-word answers, and you're just not getting anything from them. Now they've brought two coordinators in there with experience, particularly Fangio with that former head coaching experience. And you wonder, Sirianni's going to be on the hot seat coming into the season, and our change is going to come rather quickly if this thing blows up.
I think he's a lame duck. I really do. You got Kellen Moore and you got Vic Fangio, as you mentioned, and Sirianni doesn't have the mental maturity to handle that. He doesn't. And I can see this blowing up. I can see them starting off 1-4, 2-5. And then again, it's very rare that the Philadelphia Eagles make a change in season. Andy Reid last game, it happens, right? I mean, they lost to the Giants 42-7. Okay, there you go. See you later. But I just look at it as that if you need a security guard, if you need somebody else to kind of settle you in it, I don't want to hear. I've listened to these idiots and these goofballs and these clowns sit there and say, well, behind every great coach, he has someone that settles him down and holds him accountable. A security guard, dude, seriously? Is this where we're going? He's a grown man making millions of dollars coaching one of the preeminent franchises in the NFL. And you have to worry about someone who gets suspended and how you're going to handle yourself because a security guard clown, right? And think about all this happened during the 49ers game. All this happened after the 49ers basically broke the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, say what you want if you're an Eagles fan about the 49ers spitting the bit in the Super Bowl and then in overtime, but this team broke the Philadelphia Eagles. They were mentally tougher. They were physically tougher. And now we're seeing how fractured this team really is. And then to add salt to the wound, if you will, there's a report that came out. And again, I don't know how much of this we've both been in a lot of locker rooms over the years. So Craig Carton, FS1, does his TV show, used to be on the Fan for years, WFAN in New York, also worked for IP many moons ago in Philly, makes it very clear he can't stand Philadelphia and Philadelphia Eagles teams. Okay, be that as it may, he had this kind of unsubstantiated, mysterious report where he basically said, he mentioned on his show that the actual reason for the Eagles' demise was a, quote, a problem that would splinter any group of men. It is a real significant problem that cannot be fixed. Okay. He stopped short of really getting into that in the alleged situation. Others on the show speculated, and rightfully so. You're thinking, okay, maybe somebody made a pass at someone's girlfriend or their wife, or they had a romance, and wouldn't it be the first time it's happened in sports, let alone the NFL. Carton mentioned that the team was trying to fix it, was interested in seeing whether a high-profile player would still be with the team next season. So all of a sudden, you hear Jalen Hurts, you hear Slay, you hear AJ Brown. Again, this is all hearsay. Adam Schefter then went on radio in Philadelphia and basically said, it's a, he texted the Eagles and the Eagles wrote back, pretty much it's a none of that shit would happen. The text back was, quote, none of that shit was happen. So I don't know. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't know why you would just make something like this up if you didn't have any type of evidence to it. But they started 10-1. They lost 5 of 6. They got embarrassed 32-9 by Tampa Bay in the wildcard game. The collapse was so significant that you and I talked not only on BYP and on Q and on your show, it might lead to Nick Sirianni being fired. Now, you hear something like this, and the collapse goes deeper than basically, what he is suggesting, right? And we can speculate until the cows come home. It does. I hear something like that, and I think of, another player stepped over that line and that boundary with another player's maybe significant other, spouse or wife. Okay, fine. When you hear that, what do you do with that? Like, do you just kind of dismiss it? Do you just, chuck it aside and say, well, consider the source, look at this guy. Does it have any merit to it? I mean, you hear something like this and your first reaction is
clickbait and they want eyes on things over to FS1 and all these other places. But, like I said before, where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm not sure if it's in a personal thing in the locker room or relationship wise or what it was. This team was a mess and they were fractured, and the results proved that on the field. Obviously, it's a he said right now. the Eagles have their guys, their mouthpieces putting things out that saying, no, this never happened. And then you have, and we know in today's age, these athletes talk, and they talk via X, and they also talk, outside of the media. Back in the day, it was all about the newspaper. A guy would go to a paper and an anonymous source. But now these guys are putting out their own narrative. And I think there's some guys that know they're not going to be on the Eagles next season, and they're starting to put out their side of the story, what really happened. Because we talked about the results, lost 6-7 and an embarrassment in Tampa. But the story is going to come out to you eventually. And it just points to dysfunction within the organization. And it's just something that the Eagles, we just have not seen from them in a very long time. Kind of rudderless, kind of, like the Chip Kelly days, where you're like, oh, is this going to change? How far is this team going to slide before they can bounce back? And it's an ugly situation going into the 2024 season.
It's one of the biggest collapses in Philadelphia sports history, let alone NFL history. And then you have Kevin Byard, who's new, right? Cup of coffee with the Eagles. And he said right around the time they were getting ready to play the Giants to kind of just close the season out and get that tune up before Tampa. And they got waxed in that game against a horrible Giant team, basically said, I come from Tennessee, which is obviously a smaller market. I feel like it was very easy to keep in-house things in-house. It's very different over here. I feel like there's leaks everywhere. It can be very divisive in a way. It can kind of force players or whoever it may be almost protect yourself. This is from a guy that's basically had a cup of coffee. You hear this during the regular season finale, a week or two leading up to it. That tells you then you've got the situation. And it does. I do feel like Philadelphia Sports Talk Radio, they want to contrive some nonsense. And now it's almost like pushing the stuff out there where you're almost single-handedly getting AJ Brown to the point where he's just like, F this, I don't even want to be here, anymore. And I listened to the cut Peter King was on and, said you had a wide receiver that had this great run and all these yards and all these stats and all these touchdowns over 6-7 game stretch. And then all of a sudden, boom, he fell off the face of the earth. We learned that he tried to plan this outing with the players, the escape room and this camaraderie. And, then you hear about Jalen Hurts really wanted to take a plane by himself to Seattle because he wasn't sick. He just didn't want to be with the team. I mean, it's like, wow, like, what are we doing over here? Like, clean up your shit. Like, honestly, keep that dirty laundry in-house, go through the wash cycle 17 times and get it smelling like a baby's bottom, a newborn again. But you hear now all this stuff. And I just feel like, I didn't like some of the stuff that came or didn't come out of AJ Brown's mouth, but AJ Brown is an extremely talented wide receiver. And I was a little surprised it didn't manifest itself to, hey, we are going to just move away from him. But with all that being said, I feel as there's this major disconnect between the wide receiver, the quarterback, the head coach, the pass coordinators, especially the offensive coordinator. How do you remedy this, right? So now it's almost like now we're trying to get AJ Brown out of town.
It's crazy. How the mighty have fallen. They were in the Super Bowl and they talked about they were one holding penalty away from winning it all. And, they had to glide about themselves coming into the season. And it just proved out they just were not the same team as the year before. In terms of fixing it, they've already started with their scapegoating. They got rid of their two coordinators kind of pointing at them. Obviously, their defense was a huge Achilles heel. But in terms of the offense, they still put up some stats, but they just could not finish the job coming down the stretch, as you said, at the end of the season. So Kellen Moore's going to come in there. He's going to bring a new attitude. I'm sure he's going to want to bring some of his type of players in there, guys he's worked with in the past, and they're going to try to clean this up from the inside out. Obviously, you're going to have some defections. I'm looking at the Eagles roster right now. On offense, they have at least 10 free agents on there. That's backups included. So you expect Kelsey not to come back. They're going to have a lot of players that they're going to have to move in and out. But maybe moving in this new set of players will bring that new attitude there. And Sirianni, not that I expect this, Q. He's got to be that CEO. He's got to come in there and say, enough's enough. This is a new season. We got to clean this thing up. All the ugliness of last year behind us. Do I think that's going to happen? No, but that's what probably should happen.
Do you believe that you can be friends with someone, play college ball together, play on the pro level together, be on the same team, but yet if you're not getting yours, then there can be a disruption, right? Because all we hear is Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown are tight or close or good friends or solid friends. But yet you go back to the spat in Kansas City, they force fed him the ball after the fact, and then he mysteriously kind of disappeared. And you can't have a quarterback making the money that Jalen Hurts is making, trying to force feed the ball to one player to keep him happy. And I feel as though, yes, this is the norm in the NFL, but Swift doesn't get his carries. Here you go. Ertz doesn't get his touches. Here you go. I'm sorry, Goddard. I'm thinking Ertz. Goddard doesn't get his touches. Here you go. AJ Brown doesn't get his, targets. Here you go. So it's like, okay, we paid this quarterback a lot of money. You can't force feed the ball. Everyone's got to play nice, but it seems as though there's such a divide and disconnect. And if you said right now in late February in the offseason, Super Bowl just passed about a week or so ago, who stays, who leaves? I mean, the quarterback's not going anywhere, is he?
And that's once he gets that big contract, he's the guy. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate, and it's hard to kind of work around. Some guys, they become me guys once they get that big contract, and other players start talking about, what about me? I'm just as important as he is. But we all know the scales are different in terms of the quarterback. They are the leader, the face of the team, and some quarterbacks endear themselves to the players around him, like Tom Brady giving some money back. We're hearing Patrick Mahomes may restructure his deal to try to get some guys to come in, but some players just want their money, and they really, once they get it, they kind of change. So, it's a tough thing to work around in the locker room, and I'm not sure how vocal of a leader Jalen is, but he's got to come to some commonality with his players around.
Do you think AJ Brown is a problem on this team?
I don't. They should be able to. It's the world that we live in terms of receivers. There's always going to be kind of that diva receiver. You kind of have to put up with them. I'm in terms of pain in the assness. I don't think he's as bad as the Antonio Brown or some of these other guys that they're kind of painting him out to be. Other than that dust up that we talked about early in the season when they were fighting kind of on the sidelines, he really hasn't had that many problems in terms of getting discipline or getting in trouble. So, no, I don't think he's a problem for his team. I think he's a big plus for him.
I mean, look, I saw what Odell Beckham did. His antics were just ridiculous. AJ Brown is a choir boy compared to Odell Beckham, right? And the guy goes out and he plays. Now, again, I've been critical of AJ Brown with his demeanor and not talking to the media. It comes with the territory, but when he's engaged, he's an all-pro wide receiver. I'm a little surprised at what Peter King said. And, again, what question do we need to answer? Like, what question do we need to ask and get answered? Is he disruption? Is he an issue in the locker room? Is, he and Jalen not on the same page? Hell, is it possible that maybe the rift, when you have veterans on the team and they know their time is out of hand, like everyone was praising guys like Bradbury, who stood up there and said all the right things. And then you have Slay and, everyone on X and him and his wife on X. And when things are going well, they're going well. But then all of a sudden, when the shit hits the fan, now all of a sudden you got to backtrack. You got to walk back a lot of stuff. Slay to me strikes me as one of the problems, one of the issues because of his relationship with Patricia. And I still believe, this is my opinion, that, hey, you don't like a guy, you're going to start to chirp to your buddies on the defensive side of the ball. And then that becomes like, hey, man, whose side are you taking in fighting? And he's not the player that he once was. So it's just, Hurts is young. Brown is young. They've got the nucleus. We don't know what they're going to do with Swift. Who the hell knows what the Giants do with Saquon Barkley if Barkley winds up in the NFC East and not with the New York Giants? I just think that you've got a player in Brown who's had monster games. And if you look at the way his career is, the trajectory, he's a Hall of Fame wide receiver. Like, make it work. Not force feed him the ball, but get on the same page and make it work. And it goes all the way to the head coach. It does. Controlling the narrative, controlling the behavior. The problem is the head coach can't control his own behavior. And
Yeah.
that's a major issue. And that's, I believe, going to be his downfall going forward, because if he gets fired, he's going to have a real hard time trying to get a job in the NFL as a head coach.
Yeah. And then you look at the veteran coaches out there, you'd say, how would they handle this situation? They wouldn't set an example of somebody. It's
Yeah.
everybody else, get your asses in line. I'm in charge. This is my team. I'm running this show. And I don't know Sirianni's going to do this, but we've seen this quite often. Just think about recently, Super Bowl week, Kadarius Toney running his mouth and all his stuff online and everything. And Andy Reid deactivates him for the game and says, we're better off without
And
this
not
guy.
nearly as
That's the type
talented
of
as
move.
AJ Brown. Not nearly as talented as AJ.
Exactly. And that's what's got to be done here. So we'll see if there's somebody on a roster, they jettison him, or they cut him in training camp and make it a big deal and say, hey, this guy's being cut for this number of reasons, and we don't want that around here. So, but something's got to be done, because this locker room is dysfunctional, and you can't start your league year, which is in early March, talking about this already. Like you said earlier, it's a situation set up to fail already. And the season we haven't even kicked off the salary cap part of the season. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football 1029. The Game in Tampa, Florida, and of course, part of the Broad Street South Network, our NFL contributor as well. Give him a follow on X, kind enough to join us on BYP, and of course on Q. All right, next week we'll start to look at these divisions. We got the draft coming up. We'll do a little off-season needs. We'll kind of recap some of these teams and where we think they will be heading into next season. And then boom, we're going to blink. It's going to be the draft. Then it's going to be OTAs. Then it's going to be training camp. Then it's going to be preseason. And then another football season of nonsense and drama to break down every week. But always appreciate a couple moments, pal. Have a great weekend.
All right, Q, talk to you later.